Ethan Crow had been in the silver business long enough to know when the air changed. Today, he felt heavy, as though weighed down by his huge pile of coins and bars. Maybe gravity was stronger that day. Something was different. Maybe he should check his vault. It was exactly 12:31 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Friday, January 9th, 2026. The phone in his coin shop in Cheyenne, Wyoming, rang endlessly. Every time he heard it, he refused to pick up. He blocked the caller, but the phone rang again. Someone different. For 35 years, Crow Bullion and Coin on West 18th Street had never known such activity. In recessions, even after September 11, even during the banking panic of 2008, the phone rang often, but never like this. Back then, buyers were panicking. Sellers were lured by the chance of profits. Middleman dealers lied. Moms and pops rang to seek advice about jewelry. But the number of calls were never this crazy. Ethan stood behind his counter, his thick fingers resting on the polished walnut counter that was worn smooth by decades of his counting coins, examining coins, appraising coins. The shop smelled old. Outside, on Old West 18th Street, snow drifted lazily down the sidewalk as if the world were still obeying the rules. Now, to Ethan, something felt wrong. His legs were weary. He slumped back into his worn swivel chair, which sank under his weight. He ignored yet another call on his phone. On the small television mounted in the corner, an agitated market analyst was shouting something incomprehensible. Ethan didn't know who he was. Another puffed-up New York know-it-all who probably had never touched a precious coin or silver bar in his life. However, the numbers scrolling along the bottom of the screen were unmistakable. 17 million ounces withdrawn in 48 hours. Then something went wrong with the picture. The man seemed to float upwards as the image focused on the studio floor. Maybe someone bumped the camera. Ethan reached under the counter and pulled out his oldest ledger. He ran his fingers over the thick leather binding. The first entry was dated 1991. Back then, he'd believed markets were honest if you watched them long enough. Now, he'd learned better. Silver didn't lie. People did. Banks and big financial institutions lied most of all. In 2010, after a local journalist wrote about Ethan and his successful business, people assumed he was loaded. They were right, but Ethan regretted allowing the journalist to pry. Every so often, someone would try to cajole Ethan into selling his silver, but he always refused. They were usually folks from Cheyenne or Laramie, and sometimes even from Denver, down south. The image on the TV had been corrected, and now the commentator was back center screen, saying something about registered inventory collapsing. Again, words appeared along the bottom. Deutsche Bank, J.P. Morgan, Citibank, and others. Then something grabbed Ethan's attention. The text had been replaced with the words, Fed sets silver benchmark and deadline. He fumbled with the remote control and pressed the volume button hard. The commentator said that the Fed had announced that all financial institutions in the U.S. had to have at least 500,000 ounces of physical silver in their possession, or they would not be able to trade. The deadline was midnight Eastern, January 9th. That left just one day. To most people, that sounded like financial noise. To Ethan, it was a sure sign that soon enough, cannibalism would begin. He muttered, "If they haven't got enough silver, they'll turn on each other." At 12:45 p.m., his assistant Lily emerged from the back room, her phone clenched, white-knuckled in her hand. She was 27, brilliant with numbers, and still believed systems eventually corrected themselves. Her voice was tight. ML Bullion's down. Faxtan won't take orders. Alti wants $90 for each eagle, and a $50 premium. She was incredulous. $50! Ethan nodded once. That's replacement cost panic, she said. What should we do? Ethan leaned slightly back in his chair, feeling the weight of his bones. Nothing. We wait. He decided to ignore his buzzing phone until the morning. He needed to sleep. When he woke, bleary-eyed, his phone registered 53 missed calls. Amanda Keller was one of the people desperately trying to reach him. Seeing as Ethan didn't pick up, she decided it was time to move, and fast. At 10 o'clock, a plane took off from Charlotte Douglas International in North Carolina with Amanda on board. Based in Charlotte's business district, which some call Center City, she had been given an urgent, critical mission by the CEO of a major international bank. He explained that she had to succeed, or the bank would fail. It was as simple as that. Amanda was delighted with the challenge. It was her specialty. She had saved CEOs' asses plenty of times and loved the drama and the stress. She was confident she could do it again. It was a 4-hour flight to Denver, and then a 1-hour drive north to Cheyenne. She should make it in time. She messaged Ethan to ask him to see her that afternoon. He didn't reply. At the moment when Amanda's plane reached its cruising altitude of 40,000 feet, the bell above the door of Crow Bullion and Coin in Cheyenne jingled violently. 3 men seemed to float into the shop. They glided toward Ethan. Tailored jackets, polished city shoes. The leader smiled without warmth. He held tightly onto the edge of the counter, as if to steady himself. Ethan noticed. He subtly rolled his chair 1 foot forward to his side of the counter. His right hand rested near a small shelf that the strangers could not see. The leader spoke authoritatively. Mr. Crow, I represent a private equity group out of New York. We've driven up from Denver specially to see you. We'd like to make you an offer for your silver holdings. Ethan didn't invite him or the others to sit. He shrugged his heavy shoulders and said, Well, thanks for your visit. I hope it won't be a wasted trip, but I haven't decided whether I am selling or not. The man suppressed a scoff. You haven't heard my offer. Ethan raised his eyebrows. I've heard many offers over the years. He didn't let on that he knew about the Fed's silver benchmark, and, more importantly, its deadline. The man's fake smile evaporated. We predict that paper prices will correct sharply over the next day or so. You could be left holding metal worth far less than you may imagine. Ethan leaned forward. His gaze hardened. Are you trying to save me? The man frowned. Hoping he hadn't been caught out, Ethan continued. Son, paper doesn't correct. It dies. It always eventually dies. The man's jaw tightened. This may be your last chance. Ethan shook his head as he carefully reached inside the shelf. You can leave your card, and I'll contact you when I make up my mind. His hand now gripped his Ruger LCR, just in case there was trouble. The man was clearly angry, but he held back and said, I'll be in touch. We can extend our offer for just a few hours. Then he turned toward his companions, tilted his head slightly, and all 3 glided away without another word. Ethan wondered if their polished shoes even touched the floor. Lily asked, Who were they? Ethan winked. Desperate predators, looking to bleed someone weaker than me. Ethan felt himself sink a fraction lower into his old chair, as if he were putting on weight at that very moment. He pushed himself slightly away from the counter, and the chair rolled. By market close on the East Coast, the news was everywhere. Massive vault withdrawals, Chinese export bans. Southeast Asian demand was vacuuming every grain of supply. Respectable journalists were using the phrase "run" on the exchange. At 2 minutes past 4, Ethan's phone rang yet again. The many approaches were beginning to amuse him, so he picked up. The voice at the other end claimed he was calling from the metals desk of a major trader. Ethan knew the business's name, but thought that they had never called him before. He said to himself, "They must be desperate." The man sounded breathless. "We're looking to source physical silver. Immediate delivery. Any quantity." Ethan smiled and said, "You're very late." The voice said, "Have you already sold?" Ethan hunched in his chair. "Nope." The voice sounded cautious. "How much do you have?" Ethan exhaled, feeling exasperated. "Enough, but I haven't decided what to do." "Not yet. I'll make up my mind soon." The man seemed hopeful. "Please call me on this number if you would like to sell. We will be very generous when it comes to the price." Ethan murmured something polite, and the man thanked him profusely, his voice seeming to float away as if swallowed by a breeze. Then the line went dead. Just an hour after takeoff from Charlotte, Amanda was thinking about Ethan Crow and how she might make her offer. He was still not picking up his phone. Maybe someone else had got to him first and persuaded him to sell. She knew that every scrap of silver in his possession was worth 1,000,000 times its dollar value to her client. To the desperate CEO, it was a matter of professional life or death. Sitting in her first-class seat on the Airbus 320, Amanda experienced a strange sensation of weightlessness. Her notebook computer seemed to lift slightly from her fold-down tray. She grabbed it and held it down. Then she tightened her seatbelt. In the cockpit, the turbulence radar remained silent, so there seemed to be no reason to warn the passengers. Amanda sent another email to Ethan, and she followed it up with a message reminding him of their afternoon appointment. Again, there was no reply. Then, Amanda felt her body lift against the seatbelt. Her notebook floated to the left, and she had to reach out to grab it. She looked around, embarrassed. Was this happening to anyone else? It was then that the crew in the cockpit realized that something was wrong, and that the avionics weren't measuring it. As they were passing over Kentucky, the Cleveland Air Traffic Control Center ordered the flight to descend to 35,000 feet. The plane did not respond to the co-pilot's actions. He switched the control to the captain, but that made no difference. The plane remained at exactly the same altitude, and both men experienced a strange, weightless sensation, as though they were floating. For a moment, the co-pilot thought they might be falling, but the altimeter did not move at all. After a few minutes, and several failed attempts, the captain decided that something was wrong. He told a perplexed Cleveland air traffic controller that he had to land, and he asked for clearance. Cleveland suggested the Barkley Regional in western Kentucky, but still, the plane would not go down. Eventually, the captain in Cleveland decided it would be best to head back to Charlotte and attempt to land there. Amanda was dismayed when the captain told the passengers about his decision. She was still hanging on to her notebook and grabbing items that were floating away. Inexplicably, the plane behaved normally when it neared Charlotte, and it landed without incident. Both the crew and the passengers were utterly confused. Of course, Amanda was furious. She felt lightheaded and empty, as though her body was weightless. The Fed's midnight deadline passed without Ethan selling his silver stack. Some foolish institutions had been caught still holding silver derivatives, options, and futures. They may as well have let the paper blow down the Wall Street sidewalk like scraps from a trash can. By then, every dealer refused to accept orders. Mints halted production. Premiums exploded. Online forums were filled with messages of rage and disbelief. Ethan took note of the banks and financial institutions that failed to meet the Fed's deadline. They filed for bankruptcy, or they were gobbled up by the remaining big players. A few weeks after the chaotic and disorienting shakeout, Ethan received a call that turned into an invitation. It was the Fed in Washington, D.C. They wanted him to visit. Ethan flew to the nation's capital for the first time in his life. He was wearing the same suit he'd bought to attend his father's funeral. He found himself sitting at a boardroom table surrounded by serious-looking men who seemed to be hovering nervously over their chairs. Ethan thought about what was real. He knew that these characters had printed dollars as if they were confetti, and that now they had discovered that confetti was worthless, something to be thrown away. He remained silent as they made their proposal. When they finished, Ethan smiled and shook his head. "You're offering me paper in exchange for reality. You need to give me something of substance." Silence. They looked at him, empty-eyed, hopeless. Ethan eased back. "I'll trade 1 ounce at a time, publicly, at my price," someone asked. "And that price is?" Ethan slid a single silver eagle across the table. "Whatever it takes to get the next one." They agreed to his offer. They had no choice. Ethan knew they were really lightweights, and he understood he was reversing his lifelong habit of stacking. By the end of January, silver was no longer being traded on the open market. You had to prove possession. Ethan's shop on West 18th Street became a significant clearinghouse. He sold a little of his silver at first, but afterwards he offered each ounce and saw that the market reset a fraction higher each time. The predators were gone. So were most of the prey. One evening, snow fell again on West 18th Street as Lily was locking up. She turned to her boss. She knew exactly what was happening. She said, "It seems you're the last one standing." Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm just the last one," with his feet on the ground. I remembered that real money is physical silver. He heaved his heavy frame out of his chair, then turned out the lights. He was thinking about his vault. He had realized it was not full of wealth, but of truth. And far above the earth, invisible forces moved on, indifferent to paper promises, but sure about the power of gravity and the lack of it. Down below in Washington, D.C., in the back rooms of the Fed, machines were printing money that no one wanted and no one valued. Weightless confetti.